there's a love that's so much more real and more deep than what you can buy at some sleazy store or coffee stand or whatever. Romantic love is great, but Jesus came to give us a love that's so much more deeper, and it's for everybody. So anyway, that's on my heart a little bit. Like Rob said, my name is Mark Finney. I am from a small town called Harrison, Idaho. Anybody here ever heard of or know of Harrison? Shout out for Harrison, okay? So I didn't actually grow up in the town, but that's where the school was. It was closest to my sort of rural farm that I grew up on. So the population of Harrison, Idaho is 253 people. And when they took a census and they discovered that there were 3 more people living there, the next day they were out there changing it to 256. But I think next time they took a census and it had dropped, nobody bothered to fix the sign. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm from. For the last 10 years, my wife and I have been down in California, in Pasadena, mostly going to school, working, doing all kinds of stuff. But before that, my first introduction to pastoral ministry was actually as a youth pastor at First Covenant Church downtown. And so some of you know me from there, from way back in the day. And one of the things that I learned about ministry is that you have to be really careful. Now, this isn't just when you get paid to work at a church. Like, all y'all who are Christians, guess what? You're in ministry. So be careful because it's going to take you places you didn't expect it to do. So I'm working with the kids down there just part-time. And we're trying to raise some money to send the kids to like a summer camp. Or they have this winter camp thing they used to do up in Canada. And I think it might have been for that. So we got 6 or 8 kids who are there washing cars in the parking lot down there on Division and 2nd, which is a good place. A lot of traffic coming by. So a good place to get people in washing cars. So we're washing cars maybe an hour, $5 or $10 a car. The kids are having fun. You know, it's summer and we're spraying each other with the hose and having a good old time. And some kind of homies come rolling in. They look, kind of tatted up, look kind of tough, but they're nice and friendly. They show up in their big black tinted windows, fancy chrome rims, Suburban. So like, man, this is a pretty nice car. So they drop it off and they say, hey, we're going to go, walk across the street to the convenience store or go get some coffee or something. We'll be back in like 10 minutes for the car. Go ahead and wash it. Here's $10. So, we're like, oh, great. We just start washing the car up. We've just started working on it. And this lady comes running across the street screaming, that's my car! That's my car! And we're like, well, what do you mean? Somebody else has dropped this off. You weren't with them. And she's like, no, that's my car. And so she starts dialing the police. Well, within a few minutes, the police show up, and apparently this car had been stolen from this woman a couple days earlier. So we're still trying to flag people in to wash their cars. Well, there's police in the parking lot, and this lady freaking out about her car being stolen. And so we're still trying to kind of raise money there. But after about a half an hour, the police are like, "Hey, we think we found the people who did this." And they asked me, "Will you come with us and help us identify this guy?" So they put me in the back of the cop car, and we drove around the corner, and they got this guy cuffed on the hood of a police car, and they're like, "Is that the guy that drove up in that stolen vehicle?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's the guy." So all that to say, just be really careful, because if you start following and serving Jesus, you could find yourself in the back of a cop car. That's what happened to me. So I don't know. The main reason I'm here is not to tell you how to get arrested, but I, like Rob said, I'm here. Sorry, I forget that's there. I'm here because my wife and I feel like God has called us to move back up here to start a new church. And you look around, you see a lot of church buildings, and I meet a lot of nice Christian people. But statistically, about 80% of people in Spokane are not connected to any Christian community at all. So about 4 out of 5 people, the Lord is trying to tell you something right there. About 4 out of 5 people are not part of any kind of church in any way. And so we felt like God was leading us to come be part of seeing that change. And there's a lot of other great ministries in this town, a lot of other people who are starting churches, and it felt like God is inviting us to be part of that. So a little piece of the vision is there's kind of three key things that are deep in my heart. The first is helping start a community where people can discover faith. Now, if that means they've been Christians for their whole life and are just needing to learn to trust God more like we all are, that's great. If it's people who have no idea what they think about God or Jesus or the Bible, but want to just come and learn about what is faith and what does it mean to trust God, want to create a community where it's very natural for folks to just show up and learn, and you don't have to learn any secret handshakes or lingo or anything like that. So one of the reasons that I love being here at the Gathering House is to learn from what's happening here. It's just sort of a natural part of the community. And you can wander in and buy coffee and find yourself in church, or go to open mic night and meet people, but there's not some sort of secret protocol. You got to fix your life before you can show up. So I'm all about that. The second thing is just experiencing healing. I believe that God is here to heal us emotionally, spiritually, our relationships. We're all broken. We need to be healed, and that's the work that God does. And so I just have a huge heart for continuing to be healed myself and to help other people in community be healed. And the third thing is to just be a part of God's work of reconciliation. It says in the Bible that Jesus came to destroy the dividing walls between us. And I don't know if you've watched the news lately, but we've got more dividing walls in our society and in our culture and our communities than we've ever seen before. And in some ways, it's good that we're becoming more aware of some of the walls that are there. In other ways, we just see that there's just a lot of divisions between the haves and the have-nots, between people from different cultures, from different ethnic groups even, fighting with each other, not trusting each other, wounding each other. And I just a big part of my calling is to help the church live in the middle of that and say, no, we're going to be the people that spend Sunday mornings together when nobody else would spend Sunday mornings together, because we have this common denominator. We're all part of this story that Jesus is doing in the world, and He's gathered us up to be part of it. So that's a little bit about what we're excited to do. Right now we're living up on the South Hill and kind of praying about that part of town. And we're just going to kind of see where God takes us. So anyway, thanks for embracing me. Let me be part of the Gathering House community. I'm so excited to be here. I've loved hearing the story of what God is doing here, and it's neat to feel like I get to join and be part of it. So with that, our story today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10. Now, we as a Gathering House have been going all the way through this story, almost as long as this church has been meeting here, for almost a year. And now we're 10 chapters in. You can join me in chapter 10, verse 46. Anybody have the page number on those Bibles on your table? Page 691, if you're using one of those blue and white Bibles off your table there. You feel free to join me. This is how you keep me honest. Make sure that I'm reading the right stuff. Let me read the word of the Lord. It says, "Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and His disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. And he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth. He began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' Jesus stopped and said, 'Call him.' So they called to the blind man, 'Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you.' Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. 'What do you want me to do for you?' Jesus asked him. And the blind man said, 'Rabbi, I want to see.' 'Go,' said Jesus, 'your faith has healed you.' Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road." All right, anybody here ever heard of Jericho before? Okay, if you read the thick part of your Bible, the old part, it's called the Old Testament, there's a story in there about Jericho. Anybody know what happens at Jericho? The walls came a-tumbling down. Okay, so the story goes that God's people were all slaves in Egypt for like 400 years. And God raises up Moses to be their leader, and he does all these miraculous signs, and God sets the people free. So then they're going to go to this place called the Promised Land, which is where God had said, "I'm going to make you guys, give you your own country, and as a national entity, you're going to represent to the world what it looks like to be the people of God. But you got to move to this particular piece of real estate." Unfortunately, there's folks who already live there who aren't really excited about you living there, and they're not really excited about me. So there's going to be a little conflict. So they go all the way through the desert with Moses for 40 years. Moses dies, and then what happens is this guy named Joshua takes over. He'd been Moses' right-hand man. And Joshua is the person that's going to lead him across the Jordan River from the east side, across the river, and then into this promised land. So the first place they come to, though, is this town called Jericho, which a lot of people think, archaeologists think, this is quite possibly one of the oldest cities in the world, that there's walls that may be more than 10,000 years old. And it could be the very first, or one of the very first places where humans first built a walled city. So this is an ancient landmark. It's on a major east-west trade route right next to the river. So Joshua takes God's people and they end up conquering the city, sort of miraculously. They march around it a bunch of times and then blow their trumpets and the walls fall down. So it's really interesting to note that you got Joshua entering into establish God's kingdom, and they go through Jericho, and God demonstrates his power in a miraculous way. The name Jesus is just the Greek form of the Hebrew word Joshua. So Jesus' name is Yeshua, Joshua. It's exactly the same name as the Old Testament guy, Joshua. So here we got Joshua, number 2, entering in to set up his kingdom in Jerusalem, which is the next part of where the story goes. It all happens in Jerusalem, the capital of the city of God's people. And you got Joshua, number 2, going through Jericho on his way to establish his kingdom. So we have a lot of symbolism going on here, a lot of layers that this is intended to bring up. So as they get to Jericho, they go through Jericho, big old crowd of people, and as they're leaving the city, it says a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the side of the road begging. Now the thing you need to know about Bartimaeus is that he's sitting by the side of the road. He's not in the road, he's not traveling with people, he's on the sidelines. You'd say he's marginalized. He's curbside. He's on the bench. Because Bartimaeus is not going to be in the game. Now, at first reading of this, most of us would say, oh, it's because he's blind. He's not able to be in the middle of the road. He's limited by his physical disability, and so he can't participate. But I think, and certainly that is a challenge, obviously, but I think that there's a lot more layers going on here to what's going on with why Bartimaeus is on the side of the road. One of those we can see when we look at his name, actually. He's got kind of this interesting name, Bartimaeus. Now, I'm gonna nerd out on you a little bit with some Bible language stuff, so just hang with me. Okay, so the Bible is written to Jews who spoke Hebrew, right? Or that's who Jesus came to. But most of the Bible is written in Greek because a lot of people who followed Jesus were Greeks. So you got this kind of two-culture thing going on. So Bar, whatever, just means the son of somebody. That's why we got a lot of bars in the Bible. There's Barnabas and Barabbas and Barsabbas and Bar Jonah and all kinds of stuff. It just means son of whoever. Like in a lot of other cultures, that's kind of like your last name. So I'm Irish, or part of my family's Irish, so my last name is Finney. But a lot of other Irish people are like O'Malley or O'Rourke or O'Reilly. It just means your dad's name was Malley or Rourke or Riley or whatever. So it's just sort of like saying you're the kid of this person. The other half of my family is Swedish, so they're all Eriksson. So they just made it really clear. Your dad's name was Eric, you're Eriksson. Your dad's name was Robin, you're Robinson. Your dad's name was John, then you're Johnson. A lot of people named John, a lot of Johnsons out there. So to be Bar something or other is not too big of a deal. But the thing is, Timaeus is not a Hebrew name. Timaeus is a Greek name. So it's like this kind of weird fusion of ethnic identities all wrapped up in one. It's like saying that you're like O. Sanchez is your last name. Or that your last name is like Mick Chen. Are you Scottish or are you Asian? Like, how does that work? So we've got Bartimaeus, who's like Hebrew and Greek kind of mixed together. So I don't know exactly what that means. Does that mean that he was Hebrew, but that his dad was Greek? Or that he was Greek, but he hung out with a lot of Hebrew people, and so they just called him like using the Hebrew language to describe him? Or maybe his like parents were from different cultures and he was sort of blended together. I don't know this for sure, but I think it's really interesting that this is the only guy, the only person in the Gospel of Mark who we get their name. Mark makes sure to tell us this guy's name is Bartimaeus, and he translates it. It means the son of Timaeus. He's trying to point this out to us. And I don't know, but I wonder if maybe there's some ethnic tension going on here, that maybe one of the reasons Bartimaeus is sitting beside the road is because he's not really a Jew. And the Jewish people who live in Jericho are like, yeah, you probably could have a job and do something productive, because a lot of blind people still do. There's even people in the Bible who were blind but were still productive. Samson is an example of somebody who served God even though he was blind. He actually was more effective in his ministry when he was blind than before he was blind. The great patriarch Isaac was blind for the latter half of his life, but that was never referred to as like he got sidelined for it. So I wonder if Bartimaeus was sort of a ethnic or cultural outsider, that he wasn't born in the right family. His family didn't eat the right kind of food for the neighborhood. I don't know, but I wonder about that. One of the reasons that Bartimaeus is sidelined is not just because of his own limitations or even his ethnic or family identity, but also because of the way the community works. So you'll notice how people responded to him when he starts calling out to Jesus. It says in verse 48, many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Now, I don't always have the best motives. I'm sure all of you always have really pure motives. When you're following Jesus, you're always like, just inspired to do what's right all the time. If I'm following Jesus down the road, and I've been with him any amount of time, I know that he does miracles, he does cool stuff, and maybe that's part of the reason I like hanging around Jesus is because I get to see him do amazing, powerful things sometimes. So I'm thinking in my head, okay, if I'm there walking down the road with Jesus, and I hear somebody who has a really obvious and profound need, like they're asking for a miracle, they need a miracle in their life, I'm thinking, that's awesome, because I get to see something cool. So when I hear Bartimaeus shouting, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to take this. This is going on YouTube. Okay, what's Jesus going to do next? Right? Like, Bart, come on over here. Come on. Right here, let's go. But these people, they weren't even thinking about their own entertainment value. They were so dismissive of Bartimaeus because he was so outside their radar, and they so devalued him, they didn't even want to see him come to Jesus for the sake of their own spectator satisfaction. They just completely shunned him. There's a whole community keeping this guy down. And there may be other reasons he was marginalized too, but we know that he was fighting not just one or two people telling him to be quiet. It says many people told him to pipe down. So we got Bartimaeus. And the thing we need to know in this story is that Bartimaeus was on the sidelines. Now, some of us feel like we're on the sidelines sometimes. I don't know if your job is something where you feel like, oh man, I feel like I could do more. I feel like I should be appreciated more or recognized more, or somehow I just feel like I'm being kind of marginalized in my workplace or in a set of relationships or somewhere else. Maybe something has just deflated you a little bit. Maybe you've got a physical illness or a health issue or a disability, and you just feel like, man, if I didn't have this thing, then I could be in the mainstream. I could be out in the street, walking around, part of the crowd, part of the party, part of the parade. But I'm find myself on the sideline. Or maybe you just feel down. Something just kind of deflated you. One of the things that has kind of weighing me down, even as I thought about getting up here and preaching today, the last 2 weeks I've been working on this sermon, but 2 weeks ago, my grandpa died suddenly. And I feel like at different points it kind of just hits me. It just feels like the air goes out of my tires a little bit. I just feel like, I don't know, I don't know if I can do this thing that I'm called to do, preaching or other things, I just don't feel like I have as much in the tank as I'd like to have in the tank. Maybe Valentine's Day has you down because everybody's saying how much you need to be having some special somebody to share a box of chocolates with, and you just don't have that special somebody to share a box of chocolates with. I don't know what it is, but I think somebody here today, some of us, can connect a little bit with how Bart feels, just on the outside. So the amazing thing about this story is not necessarily that Jesus heals him, because Jesus heals lots of people. It's not necessarily that Bart was marginalized, because we know from our own experience in our culture that people get shoved to the margins all the time. You got any sign of weakness or difference from other people, and you're going to find yourself pushed to the outside. The amazing thing about this story that I think is that Bart keeps screaming. I think it's amazing that he keeps going. I mean, I don't know about you, but when people tell me to shut up, usually I do. People tell me that I'm not worth it, or that I'm not good enough to try X, Y, or Z, or that they just don't want me hanging around with them. I catch the clue pretty quick, and I step out. Now, Bartimaeus has had to have gone through this maybe his whole life of always being sidelined. So where he gets the gumption to keep crying out to Jesus in spite of all the opposition, I don't know. I don't know if he just was fed up. I don't know. I just think somehow God was working in Bart's heart and just gave him something to just keep crying out. This man was desperate, and he believed that something good could happen because he knew that Jesus was walking by. He knew Jesus was getting close, and whatever it was, he wanted to be part of it. Now, the thing that gets him through, I think, is really interesting, the way that Bart responds. He doesn't push through the crowd. He doesn't, do a bunch of other kinds of things that he could try to do. He just cries out to Jesus. He just trusts that if he yells loud enough and long enough, that Jesus is going to hear him and respond. Now, Jesus doesn't respond right away. Jesus doesn't even respond directly. But Bart keeps crying out to Jesus. And his prayer is a really interesting prayer. It seems kind of basic, kind of simple. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. It seems like, okay, Jesus, hey, pay attention. It seems really vague. Do I pray that very often? Usually I feel like I have to pray something more specific. But Bart says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, it's really not only is it this interesting paradox that we have the son of Timaeus crying out to the son of David, but there's this identity piece there. There's two pieces of this prayer that make it work and that make it powerful and that make it a prayer that we can all learn from. The first part is how clearly Bartimaeus identifies the identity of Jesus. He says, I know who you are, Jesus. I know that you're the son of David. Now, in Hebrew speak, what that means is you're the chosen one. David was the greatest king that ever lived in Israel. He was the prototype of God's chosen leader. And the prophecies all said that there would be a descendant of David who would come and be an even greater leader than David was. And Bart is saying, I know you're that guy. You're the guy that's going to have all the power, all the authority, all the ability to change things. Not only to establish Israel as a great kingdom in power, but the Messiah is supposed to be the one who sets everything right, who establishes justice. That you don't just use your power to build a big military or to make your palaces big or wealthy or whatever. Like, you're going to use your power to make everything right, to make everything just, to make everything fair. So what that means is that somebody like me, you're the son of David. You're the highest person in the whole world. And I'm the son of Timaeus, an outsider, a Greek. I'm not even maybe fully Hebrew. But I know that the son of David, the Messiah, is here to make everything right. So I have a right as the marginalized person to call out to you because your role as the person with power is to help out those of us who don't have it, is to make things right. Bart says, I know that's who you are, and I know that that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to listen to me. I matter because you're the son of David, and because you're the Almighty. Now, the other part of the prayer is also really interesting. He just says, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. Sometimes I feel like maybe I don't pray about things because I don't know exactly what to say. I face a situation that's confusing or very complex, and I'm not sure exactly what I want Jesus to do in this situation, so maybe I don't bother to ask him at all because I'm not sure what to tell him to do for me, right? But Bart doesn't worry about that. He just says, Jesus, have mercy on me. You do whatever you want to do, Jesus. I don't even know what you're going to do, but I know that you have something that I need. Help me out here. Just have mercy on me, Jesus. Now, there's reasons why sometimes I find myself not praying. And I think sometimes I either forget who God is and that God's big and that God cares, or I think that what I have to ask just doesn't matter to God. Or the other thing is that sometimes I don't pray because I kind of don't think I need God that bad. Like, well, it's just a small thing. I can probably take care of it myself. If I just work a little harder, do I really need to bother big, important Jesus in the middle of a crowd to come stop and pay attention to little old me and my small problem? And I don't know about you, but that's something that I find myself doing sometimes. I've got this sort of independent streak. I guess you'd call me an American because we're all kind of independent. And I noticed this the other day. So we just moved into our new house up on 42nd Street about a week ago. And so until then, we've been living with my wife's parents out off of Bigelow Gulch, and they've got a big house, and we lived in the basement. And so we had ordered some furniture online, and we kind of had put it in the basement to get it out of the way. And so when we're moving up to the new house, I'm taking all of our stuff and loading it in a car. Well, one of the things I bought was this kind of like chest thing, goes by the foot of your bed. It's kind of like you can sit on it, or you can put stuff inside of it, like shoes and stuff. But it's kind of big, like it's probably 5 or 6 feet long, and couple feet wide, couple feet deep. It probably is like 50 or 60 pounds, so it's kind of big and kind of heavy and awkward. And so we're moving out of the basement, and I kind of figure out how to get this thing up and kind of get it on my shoulder. But the basement has got 2 sets of stairs that like goes halfway up, and then it turns the corner and goes the other way up to get out of the basement. So I've got this big, awkward piece of furniture on my shoulders, and I'm trying to kind of get it up the stairs, but not bang the walls, because I don't want to like ding up my in-laws' house while they just let me live there. So I'm trying to be really careful, but also don't want to ding my new piece of furniture. And so I'm kind of struggling and kind of sweating and kind of just trying to work my way up the stairs. And I get up to the stairs, and my father-in-law is sitting in there at the table, like reading the newspaper or something. And he looks at me and says, "Why didn't you ask me to help you with that?" And honestly, the thought had never occurred to me. I had just never thought of even asking him. I just said, well, I can do it. Like, I wouldn't want to bother somebody. I can pull this off. And I realized, like, what is that? What am I Here I was down in the basement, sweating and struggling, and all the help I needed was right upstairs. Anybody hear that? Anybody hear that? Here I am down in the basement, sweating and struggling, and all the help I need is right upstairs if I just ask for it. If I just ask for it. Now, I'm sure none of you are as stubborn or short-sighted or bullheaded as I am. But remember that next time you're down in a basement with a heavy piece of furniture. Maybe there's somebody upstairs that wants to help you with it if you just ask. So, that's what Bart does. He just asks. He says, Son of David, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me, Son of David. Now, I know we're all good church people and none of us would ever be like this, but if you were ever in a different church before or some other group of Christians, you'd know that this crowd that's following Jesus does what sometimes Christians would do. These were Jesus' followers. These weren't just rabble. These weren't just random people from Jericho. It says these were the people who were with Jesus. And how did they respond to Bartimaeus' interruption? They told him to shut up. They told him that it didn't count, that they didn't want him there because if you really want to spend time with Jesus, you really want Jesus' attention, you better email his secretary, get on his day planner, then maybe you can be on the agenda for the congregational meeting, and in 2 or 3 weeks you can have an audience with Jesus. But right now, we're having a parade. We're having a worship service. We're having a program here, people. This is a program. We don't interrupt programs. Bart, not the right time, buddy. And not the right way. This is sort of like socially inappropriate to just start screaming out over a crowd. We're all going to feel a little awkward if somebody walked in here right now and started screaming, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. But sometimes, as Christians, I think the problem is the disciples got in front of Jesus. They're like, okay, so here's the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. We know where Jesus is going to go, so we're going to just kind of hop in front of Jesus on the road and kind of clear out the rocks and sticks and awkward people because we know where Jesus is going, we know what he's doing, and we need to make sure that that nothing kind of throws a bump in the program. We don't want any hiccups in what we know God is going to do in this neighborhood or this city or this town or the lives or this congregation or whatever. We just got to make sure we get out in front of Jesus, clear the way, and then Jesus can do his thing once we've set it up for him. The only thing is Jesus never called people to go in front of him. He always called us to go behind him, to follow him. So the disciples do what I've done sometimes, and they say, oh, sorry, you're not part of Jesus' plan. Fortunately, Jesus intervenes. And here's one thing I love about this story. I love the way Jesus intervenes. Okay, so Bartimaeus is calling out, right? He's screaming, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner. Have mercy on me, Jesus. And Jesus must have heard him directly, right? Because the crowd is telling the guy to be quiet. There's not anybody in the crowd who's like, hey, I think that's a good idea. Jesus, there's this guy Bart. Let me introduce you to him. Like, that's just not happening in the story. Jesus had to hear Bart directly. It's the only way Jesus would have known what's going on. So Bart yells loud enough that Jesus hears him. And then notice how Jesus responds. Jesus doesn't just yell back, hey, Bart, thanks, man, you're healed. Bzz, like, see ya. Enjoy the new sight. Like, and just keeps going. He doesn't do that. Nor does he say, hey, Bart, I hear you. Come on over, buddy. He could have easily said that. But he turns to the people around him and he says, call him. Okay, so who were the people around him? The same people that were telling Bart to stuff a sock in it a few minutes ago, right? Bart, keep it down, buddy. Oh, wait, what, Jesus? Oh, you got a pair of front row tickets that you want me to go give to that guy and bring him over here right now? Okay. Now, I love that Jesus does that because he never lets us follow him on our own. Like Christianity is a very personal thing. It's about knowing Jesus, but it's never a private thing. That if we follow Jesus, we're going to get caught up in doing the same kinds of stuff that Jesus does. He's going to call us to participate in his crazy work. So if you like watching Jesus work, that's great. But just know that whatever you see Jesus doing is going to get under your fingernails too. Jesus is going to say, hey, you liked what I did? All right, now it's your turn. Here you go. You participate. You call him. Just like a few chapters earlier in the Gospel of Mark when Jesus feeds the 5,000. All his disciples are like, hey, Jesus, there's like 5,000 people and they're probably hungry. You should send them away to go get some food for the night. And Jesus, what does Jesus say? You remember? You give them something to eat. Uh-oh, now we're on the hook. Same thing happens here where Jesus tells his followers, hey, you call him. You're the one that told him not to come, but I'm actually interested in connecting with this guy, but I want you to do it. I want you to facilitate the introduction. I want you to be part of the work that I'm going to do, which is a great privilege, but also takes us outside of our comfort zone. Now, I'm not sure what happened with them and why they changed their tone. I don't know if they were just trying to, if they were just fickle and just like, oh, okay, whatever. Oh, this is great. Or if the disciples were finally getting it and saying, oh, all right, Jesus, you want to work in this guy's life? I'll get excited about it. Anyway, somehow they get all happy and say, cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. Now, here's how Bart responds, okay? He throws his cloak aside and comes to Jesus as fast as he can. He jumps to his feet and comes to Jesus. Now, you'll remember from a couple of weeks ago when Pastor Rob preached about the rich young ruler, right? How he comes to Jesus and falls down and says, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus says, well, do you follow all the commandments? The guy's like, yes. And Jesus says, one thing, you need to do one more thing. Do you remember what it was? Sell everything you own, give it to the poor, and then come follow me, right? And the guy did it, right? No, he didn't do it. He couldn't part with his stuff. He had too much stuff, and he said, man, if I follow Jesus, I have to give up all my stuff. I can't do it. Well, here's this beautiful paradox where here's Bart. The guy has nothing. He probably owns nothing but the clothes he's wearing, right? The only asset he has is his cloak. So back in the day, that sort of the fashion thing was you got 2 layers of clothes. You got sort of this thin undergarment that's sort of like your comfortable clothes, and then you have this big, thick, like a wool outer robe that would be scratchy, so you wear the thinner one on the inside so it's not scratchy, but the outer one really is what keeps you warm. And there's some verses in the Old Testament that talk about if you're going to like borrow money from somebody, if you don't have anything else to use as collateral for your loan, you can give them your cloak because it's kind of a valuable thing. It's not cheap, it's not easy to obtain. So if you've got one, you can use that as your only asset. So Bartimaeus, this is probably his only asset, his only thing. And if things don't work out with Jesus and he doesn't get his sight back or he doesn't get whatever he wants Jesus to do, he's going to have a hard time finding that cloak again. Is he going to remember where he put it? Is he going to be able to find it? Is somebody else from the crowd going to be like, man, there's a cloak laying here. This is worth a lot of money. I'm taking this home. I'm going to sell this. Bart doesn't seem to care because he thinks, man, that cloak's a little heavy. It might slow me down just a little bit from getting to Jesus, and I am not being slowed down at all. I'm throwing that thing off, and I'm heading straight to Jesus. So instead of this rich guy who has tons and tons and tons of stuff and can't get rid of it, we have this guy Bart who has nothing except a cloak, and he's throwing it aside so that he can get to Jesus as fast as he possibly can. What a beautiful contrast. I mean, how much faith is that to trust Jesus and to be drawn to Jesus so much that I will throw away even the little things in my life. I'll set them aside to say, man, if that's holding me back from Jesus, I'm shedding that. That's going to St. Vinny's or one of the other 300 thrift stores in Spokane. Do you guys know that this is like the thrift store capital of the universe? My wife is really excited about that, by the way. So he throws his cloak aside and runs to Jesus. And then here's another echo of another thing we just heard in previous weeks. Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? Now, the Bible is full of stupid questions, and most of them are asked by Jesus. So sometimes the disciples actually call Jesus on it and be like, Jesus, come on. Like, really? Really? What? The guy's blind. He obviously came here because he wants you to restore his sight. You're known as the guy who restores sight to blind people. You've done it lots of times before. Stop with the questions. Just heal the guy. Come on, we got to get to Jerusalem. It's getting late. Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? Now notice, listen carefully. This is not the first time Jesus has asked this question in the Gospel of Mark. Do you remember last week and the story from last week? James and John come to Jesus and they say, hey, Jesus, we heard through the grapevine that you're going to become the ruler of the universe. And we're figuring that that's kind of a big job and you're probably going to need a staff and that you probably really need a couple of really well-qualified VPs. We just both happen to have our CVs right here. We'd just like you to just, read through this and, John and I would really like to sort of apply for the position of right and left-hand man for you when you rule the world. They come to Jesus and Jesus had asked them previously, what do you want me to do for you? We want you to promote us. We want you to give us more power, more authority, more fame than everybody else in the world. That's what we want you to do for us. Same question. Jesus asked the same question. And I think that when you see something more than once in Scripture, it's worth meditating and reflecting on that. What do you want Jesus to do for you? Why do you come to church or read your Bible or pray? What is it that you want from Jesus? And is that the same thing that Jesus wants for you? Is Jesus an agent to give you what you already want? Or is Jesus an agent to tell you what you need and to give you what you need? I don't know. That's a haunting question. That's a haunting question. What do you want me to do for you? In one sense, it's an invitation of Jesus saying, be honest with me. Tell me everything that's in your heart. But in another sense, it's an invitation to reflection. What is really in our hearts? Why are we in this whole Jesus thing? Is it because it's kind of cool or hip, or we know somebody else that we like, or because it's somehow advantageous to us, or it fills a need that I have always had since I'm a kid, or what is it? What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. Now the blind man says, Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see. Now it seems like a pretty straightforward request. I just want to see. The irony of this whole story, though, and I think one of the things that the author of Mark wants us to notice here, is that Bart has better vision than everybody else in the story. That he's asking to see, but he sees Jesus more clearly than anybody else does. He's the one that confesses, Jesus, you're the Son of David, and I know who you are and what you're about, and I want to be part of it. The rest of them were all distracted, wanting Jesus to give them a promotion or power or fill their empty stomachs or whatever was serving themselves. And Bart said, you're about something bigger. I just want to be me. I just want to be a part of your work in the world. I want to see. Now, I talked to a friend this week who's actually visually impaired. She's blind, and I asked her to help me understand this story because you got to be careful when you read the Bible. You got to be careful that you're just not reading your own story and putting Jesus in it and making it all about yourself. And I've never been blind. I'm not super close to somebody who is. And so I want to make sure that I understand what this passage is like from Bartimaeus' perspective. And this friend of mine told me something that I just thought was really profound. She said, if Jesus asked me that question, I'm not sure that the first thing I would say is that I want him to restore my eyesight. Because I think that there's worse things than being blind. She said, I'm a parent, I've got kids, I've got a job. You can learn to function in a world without your eyesight, without being able to see as clearly as other people. But I've also learned that because of my visual impairment, I'm forced to trust God in ways that a lot of other people aren't. They can rely on their own resources, their own senses, their own networks to do things for themselves that I can't rely on. And because of that, I've learned to trust Jesus, to trust God in ways that a lot of other Christians don't get to learn how to do. Did you hear that? How profound is that? How profound is that? And that's why it's ironic that Bart says this, I want to see, because Mark is pointing out to us that Bart already does see. And that's the prayer that the rest of us should be praying. God, help us to see. We may have physical eyes, but if we don't see through the eyes of the Holy Spirit, if we don't see who Jesus really is and what he's really about, we're going to miss it. We're going to see the physical objects around us, but we won't see the spiritual reality of what God is doing in this world. Bart already sees. And that's why I think it's interesting and appropriate that Jesus says, your faith has healed you, or your faith has saved you. In one sense, the faith that it took for Bart to call to Jesus in that moment had healed and saved him. But in a larger sense, the faith that had grown in him through a lifetime of having to trust God had already healed and saved Bartimaeus before Jesus walked down the road that day. Your faith has already saved you. You've learned to trust, Bart. You're walking the right direction. Now, Bartimaeus is the last person we hear of in the Gospel of Mark who is the recipient of a miracle from Jesus. This is a real turning point from Jesus' sort of larger ministry to the very next story is when Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and that's this sort of the last big piece of Jesus' story where he confronts the powers, he ends up getting crucified, he's resurrected. But this is the last person who joins Jesus, who experiences Jesus' healing and joins his ministry. Bart's the last guy in this turning point. And in some ways, I think that this is sort of the ultimate example of discipleship. That Bartimaeus is the quintessential disciple in Mark. Mark has been writing this story about all these different people who encounter Jesus and learn to follow Jesus, and all the ways they kind of get it and then they kind of don't. Like when Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ and then rebukes Jesus for going to die. He's kind of got it, but not. Earlier, Jesus heals. I didn't think of this before, but I think maybe this makes sense. Right after that, Jesus heals a blind person by spitting on his eyes, and it says that he touches him once and he sees like kind of foggy, and he touches him again, and he sees clearly. So Jesus kind of partially healed him, and then he had to touch him again to complete the healing. And I'm just now making the connection with that I think that was sort of like, hey, there's ways we come to Jesus and grow along the way. But this now is Bartimaeus, where he sees everything. He sees clearly. This guy gets it. This is what it means to follow Jesus. Not to have your physical body restored, because Jesus doesn't always heal all of our physical, all of our physical ailments. Some people use this verse, your faith has saved you thing, to try and promote a kind of Christianity that's like this. You get whatever you want from Jesus if you just want it bad enough. Like if we all prayed and believed and named that my car is going to turn into a Ferrari before we walk out of this parking lot, I'm going to go out there and it's going to be a Ferrari because I believed it hard enough. Anybody ever heard of that kind of Christianity? Well, it's not in the Bible. And one example of that is what percentage of people die? 100% of people die. Even if you believe really, 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 really hard that Jesus can heal you from whatever's killing you, yeah, you're still going to die at some point. Maybe he'll heal you sometimes along the way, but it doesn't happen like that. Faith is not it's not a quarter that you put in the vending machine to get whatever you want. It's learning to follow Jesus. So here we got Bartimaeus. He's seen with the eyes of faith. He's the ultimate disciple. This is exactly what it looks like. Mark's told this whole story for 10 chapters. Now we get one person who really gets it. He knows who Jesus is, and he absolutely demonstrates what it means to follow Jesus, to throw your cloak behind, to simply ask Jesus to have mercy on you, and then to go wherever he goes. And the last thing I want to say about Bartimaeus today that I love about him is the last thing we know about Bartimaeus is that he disobeys Jesus. Do you see that in the end? What does Jesus tell him to do? He says, go, your faith has healed you. Your faith has saved you. And what does Bartimaeus do? He says, I ain't going nowhere. I'm sticking with you. I think Bart probably didn't even go back for his cloak, right? I think he probably didn't even go back for his cloak. I think he said, man, Jesus, I'm with you. And wherever you go, that's where I go. So it says that Bartimaeus followed Jesus along the road. And here we have this beautiful contrast from where we started to where we end, right? And this is the story of every one of us who's a Christian. And if you're not a Christian yet, this is the story that God invites you into. Where did Bart start? He started on the sideline, right? He started on the edge of the road, sitting on the curb, pushed aside, and Jesus comes and finds him. And now where is he? He's in the road. He's in the middle of the road, right behind Jesus, following Jesus on the way to Jerusalem. He doesn't know what's going to happen in Jerusalem. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty. That road from Jericho's about 600 feet below sea level, and Jerusalem's like 2,500 feet. So it's a steep hike for about 15 miles to get there. It's a long, tough road. But Bart says, I don't care what the road is like. Jesus, if you're going there, I'm walking with you. And the reason is because he knew he was loved. Jesus loved him, gave him a chance, gave him mercy. So I'd like to conclude with just a moment of silence to reflect, and then I'm going to close this in prayer. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for loving us so much. I thank you that you heard Bart's cries when nobody else heard them. And I thank you that you hear our cries when we cry out to you about things that nobody else knows about or nobody else wants to know about. That you hear us when we cry for mercy. That you call us. That you set us free. That you affirm what little faith we have, and you draw us and invite us to be part of your work in the world. To hang out with you. To be loved by you. And to be part of your work of healing, redeeming, and reconciling people. Thank you for this story of Bart. And thank you for this story that you're weaving into each one of our lives. I pray, God, that the questions that you asked Bartimaeus will haunt us. I pray that the love you showed to Bartimaeus will also haunt us throughout this week and beyond. I thank you for your word, and I thank you for your spirit that makes this more than an old story, but a true story that's living and real now. We praise you and we thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen.